In 1968, the United States Congress chose just 8 rivers in the entire country to launch a brand new idea, a national system of wild and scenic rivers. The water flowing beside this trail was one of those original 8. That single act of protection gave this whole park its name. Today, we are riding the Minnesota bank of the St. Croix River, through a valley carved by a glacial flood, walked by fur traders and soldiers, and once ruled by the largest pile-driven dam on Earth. This is Wild River State Park, and the story begins with the first pedal stroke. We are in east-central Minnesota in Chisago County, about an hour northeast of the Twin Cities. The park stretches along the west bank of the St. Croix River, which forms the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin here. The nearest towns are small ones, Almaland just down the road, Center City the county seat a few miles beyond, and Taylor's Falls downstream. The park itself hugs 18 miles of riverbank, a long green ribbon of floodplain forest, old fields and restored prairie. 35 miles of trail thread through it, and this afternoon our wheels will cover a good sample of them. It is late September and the forest is right on the edge of turning. Most of the canopy still holds its summer green, but the sumac has gone red and the first maples are showing gold. The trail rolls gently here, packed and wide, the kind of surface that lets a bike settle into an easy rhythm. Riding a place like this is different from walking it. The miles come easier, and the landscape unrolls like a story being read aloud. So why is this called Wild River State Park when the river on the map is the St. Croix? The answer is that law from 1968, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Congress selected 8 rivers as the founding members of the system, among them the Rogue in Oregon, the Salmon in Idaho, the Rio Grande in New Mexico, and the Upper St. Croix with its tributary, the Namekagon. The act declared that some rivers should remain free-flowing, their banks protected from development, for the benefit of everyone. When Minnesota later built a park on the shoreline, it named the park not for a town or a founder, but for the designation itself. Through the trees on our right, the river keeps appearing and disappearing, wide and calm and glinting in the afternoon sun. This stretch of the St. Croix moves without hurry, sliding past sandbars and wooded islands. There are no towns visible on the far shore, just the Wisconsin woods running down to the waterline. That is exactly what the Wild River idea was meant to preserve. Keep pedaling, and the 21st century starts to feel very far away. The valley we are riding through was cut by water on a scale that is hard to imagine today. Around 10,000 years ago, as the last ice age ended, meltwater poured out of glacial Lake Duluth, an ancestor of Lake Superior swollen against the ice. That outflow came south through this corridor as a torrent, scouring out the broad valley of the St. Croix. The gentle river beside us is the quiet descendant of that flood. Every bluff and terrace along this trail is a mark left by ice and rushing water. Down here near the water, the trail crosses the Old Floodplain, flat and rich and shaded by silver maple and basswood. In spring, this ground can flood and the forest is built for it, trees that tolerate wet feet and soil renewed by the river. In September, it is dry and quiet, the path carpeted with the first fallen leaves. It is fast, easy riding, and it gives the legs a chance to spin while the eyes wander. The river built this ground, and the river still owns it. People have lived along the St. Croix for thousands of years, long before any of the names on today's map. This valley is part of the homeland of the Dakota people, and during the fur trade era, the Ojibwe also moved into the region from the north and east. The river was a highway, a food source, and a boundary, rich in fish, wild rice country, and game. Later surveys in this park found evidence of an ancient village site right on the shoreline. The trail we are riding follows routes that people have traveled for countless generations. The trail lifts away from the floodplain now, climbing one of the old river terraces in long, easy grades. On a bike, you feel the shape of the land directly, every rise of the valley recorded in your legs. Each terrace along the St. Croix marks a level where the ancient river once ran before cutting deeper. So this little climb is really a ride up through time, from the modern river to an older, higher version of it. At the top, the forest opens and the light changes. In 1847, a fur trading post was built here on top of that ancient village site by the river. Together with another post established nearby in 1850, these were the last fur trading posts in the whole St. Croix Valley. They operated for only a few years before the trade finally faded. For nearly 2 centuries before that, furs from these woods had moved through native and European hands toward markets across the ocean. When these posts closed, one long era of valley history ended just as another was beginning. The trail winds now through drier ground, oak woods with an open, sunlit floor. Acorns pop under the tires, and squirrels are working overtime ahead of the coming winter. This is classic St. Croix Valley country, sandy soils laid down by glacial rivers, holding oaks and pines where the moisture is thin. The curves come one after another, and the bike swings through them with an easy flow. It is the kind of riding you wish could go on for hours. Hidden in these woods is one of the oldest roads in Minnesota. In the 1850s, the federal government built a military road from Point Douglas, where the St. Croix meets the Mississippi, all the way north to Lake Superior. It was meant to move troops and supplies through territory that had almost no roads at all, and it ran right along this river. A surviving stretch inside the park, the Deer Creek section, dates to 1853, and in 1991 it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Soldiers rarely used it in the end, but settlers, loggers, and mail carriers wore it deep into the ground. Some of the paths in this park follow alignments that have carried traffic for more than a century and a half. Rolling along this straight wooded stretch, it is easy to picture an ox cart groaning through the mud where the tires now hum. A journey that takes us minutes took those travelers the better part of a day. The forest has grown back over almost everything, but the through line of the route remains. On a bike, you become simply the latest traveler on a very old road. The road and the river brought settlers, and in the 1850s the little towns of Sunrise and Amador were founded near what is now the park. Swedish and other European immigrants cleared farms in the surrounding country, and the villages served them with mills, stores, and post offices. For a while it seemed the railroads and the river trade might make these places grow. Instead, the main lines passed them by, and the towns stayed small or faded almost entirely. Their names survive on the land today, attached to a township, a prairie, and a quiet bend of river. The trail breaks out of the trees now and runs along open ground, old farm fields slowly going back to grass and brush. For about a century, much of this park was working agricultural land. You can still read that history in the straight field edges and the aging fence lines. Goldenrod and asters bloom purple and yellow along the path, the last big color of the season. The pedaling is easy, and the sky suddenly feels very large. The event that transformed this valley more than any other was the white pine logging boom. In the second half of the 1800s, the forests of the upper St. Croix and its tributaries held some of the finest pine in North America. Every winter, crews cut timber in the North Woods, and every spring the river ran thick with logs driven downstream to the mills. The St. Croix became a working river, a conveyor belt of timber feeding the growth of Midwestern cities. The scale of it was immense, and it set the stage for the most dramatic structure this park has ever held. The trail tips downhill now, dropping back toward the water in a long, satisfying descent. The brakes feather, the trees blur past, and the river flashes bright through the gaps. Somewhere below us is the stretch of shoreline where the logging era reached its peak. It is hard to imagine this peaceful water jammed bank to bank with timber, but that is exactly what happened here, and it happened on a catastrophic scale. In 1886, the St. Croix produced one of the most famous log jams in American history. At the Narrows by St. Croix Falls, just downstream from here, drifting logs caught and locked into a tangled mass that choked the river for miles. Millions of feet of timber sat wedged together while crews worked for weeks to break the jam loose. The disaster cost the lumber companies dearly, and it convinced them that the wild river had to be brought under control. Their answer would be built on the very ground this park now protects. We turn north now, riding upstream with the river close on our right hand. The current slides past at walking pace, patient and unbothered. This same water once carried entire forests to the sawmills, log by log, spring after spring. Today it carries paddlers, herons, and the occasional fallen leaf. The transformation from industrial river to wild river happened within a handful of human lifetimes. The answer to the Great Jam was Nevers Dam, built here in 1889 and 1890 on land named for the farm family who lived beside it. Lumber baron Frederick Weyerhuser and his partners spent about $250,000 on it, a fortune at the time. It stretched more than 600 feet across the St. Croix, built not of stone or concrete, but of thousands of wooden pilings driven into the riverbed. That made it the largest pile-driven dam in the world. Its job was simple: hold back the river and its logs, and release them on a schedule set by men instead of weather. Nevers Dam was a machine the size of a river. Its centerpiece was an enormous bare trap gate that could raise or lower the flow of the whole St. Croix, flanked by 15 sluice gates for passing logs. Behind it, the dam could pond the river and its timber for miles upstream, a holding reservoir for entire winters of cutting. Electric lights were strung across the structure so that crews could sluice logs around the clock. For a wooden dam on the northern frontier, it was an astonishing piece of engineering. Riding this stretch today, you would never guess any of it without the markers. The pilings are gone, the pond is gone, and the river runs free past quiet wooded banks. A landing and overlook in the northern part of the park mark where the great structure once stood. Nature has taken the site back so completely that the loudest sound is our own tires on the trail. Few places show the rise and fall of an industrial age more gently than this one. The last great log drives on the St. Croix ended around 1912, and with them the dam lost its purpose. It lingered for decades afterward, used for a time to help manage flows for power generation downstream. Then spring floodwaters battered the aging structure and compromised it beyond repair. In 1955, Nevers Dam was removed, and the upper St. Croix ran unobstructed once again. 13 years later, Congress would declare it one of the first protected wild rivers in America. The afternoon is stretching long now, and the light has turned warm and low. Shadows of the trees lie in bars across the trail, flickering over the handlebars as we roll through them. September light in Minnesota has a particular honey color that photographers chase and riders simply get to live inside. The legs have found their all-day rhythm. Miles like these are the reason the bike exists. By the 20th century, much of this shoreline had been quietly assembled by the Northern States Power Company, which held it with an eye toward possible future dam projects. Those dams were never built, and after the river won federal protection, the land found a different destiny. The company's holdings became the foundation of a new state park, established by Minnesota in the 1970s. Wild River State Park opened to the public in 1978. Land once banked for industry became, instead, one of the great riverside parks of the Midwest. The trail slips through stands of pine now, straight-trunked and evenly spaced, plantations planted decades ago on old farmland. The air changes under the pines, cooler and scented with resin, the trail floor soft with needles. Park managers are gradually thinning some of these plantations to make room for the landscapes that were here first. It is a reminder that a park is not just preserved, it is tended. The bike whispers through and the forest closes behind us. Some of the most important work in this park happens with fire and seed. In the Amador Prairie area, crews and volunteers are restoring the prairie and oak savanna that covered parts of this valley before the plow. Through the park's prairie care effort, prescribed burns sweep away built-up thatch and invading brush, mimicking the wildfires that once kept the savanna open. Volunteers gather native seed in the fall and sow it in the spring. Year by year, big bluestem, wildflowers, and open-grown oaks are reclaiming their old ground. Riding through the restored prairie in late September is the payoff for all that work. The grasses stand tall and copper-colored, seed heads nodding as we pass. Grasshoppers scatter from the trail, and the wind moves through the field in long, slow waves. A century ago this was cropland, and a century before that it was savanna much like this. The circle is closing, one burn and one seed bag at a time. Today, the St. Croix along this park is part of the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, with about 200 miles of the river and its tributary the Namekagon under National Park Service protection. The corridor is a refuge in a busy region, its waters home to fish, mussels, and river otters, its skies patrolled by bald eagles and osprey. White-tailed deer browse the field edges at dusk, and sandhill cranes call over the valley in migration. Protection here was never about locking people out. It was about making sure the river stayed alive enough to be worth visiting forever. Wild River State Park now protects more than 6,500 acres along its 18 miles of the St. Croix. 35 miles of trails serve hikers, riders, and horseback travelers in the warm months, and in winter, many of them become one of the better cross-country ski networks in the region. There are campsites, camper cabins, canoe landings, and a visitor center above the river. It is a big, quiet park that rewards slow exploration in every season. And as we have seen all afternoon, it carries far more history than its peaceful trails let on. The last miles bring us back down the valley with the sun dropping toward the treetops. The ride has carried us across 10,000 years in a single afternoon, from glacial floods to fir posts, from a soldier's road to the greatest wooden dam ever driven into a riverbed. Every landscape holds its history this way, layered quietly under the surface, waiting for someone to come through slowly enough to notice. A bicycle, it turns out, moves at exactly the speed of noticing. The trail curves one more time toward the trailhead. Wild River State Park earns its name twice over, once from an act of Congress and once from the living river that flows beside every mile of its trails. If you come, bring a bike or good boots, give yourself a full day, and let the St. Croix set the pace. The Wild River will do the rest. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.